Have you ever heard an argument that included real evidence, but the conclusion still felt wrong? A manager says, "This employee sends fewer emails, so they must be less productive." The evidence may be true. Maybe the employee really does send fewer emails, but does that prove they are less productive? Only if you accept a hidden assumption that the number of emails someone sends is a reliable measure of how much work they accomplish. That assumption is doing most of the work. And once you expose it, the argument suddenly looks very different. Because evidence does not connect itself to a conclusion. There is always a bridge between what we know and what someone wants us to believe. That bridge is called the warrant, and it sits at the center of one of the most useful frameworks for understanding arguments ever created, the Toulmin Model. This is reclaiming rhetoric. Today, we are breaking down the Toulmin Model, a 6-part framework for analysing how real-world arguments are actually built. The model was developed by British philosopher Stephen Toulmin and introduced in his 1958 book, The Uses of Argument. Toulmin believed that ordinary arguments rarely operate like perfect mathematical proofs. They look more like cases made in a courtroom. Someone makes a claim. They offer evidence. They rely on a rule or principle connecting that evidence to the claim. They establish how certain the conclusion is, and they recognize the conditions under which it might not hold. Toulmin's framework gives us 6 elements: claim, grounds, warrant, backing, qualifier, and rebuttal. The first 3 form the core of the argument. The final 3 help establish its strength, its limits, and its ability to survive criticism. Let's break them down. Element 1, the claim. The claim is the conclusion the argument wants you to accept. It answers the question, what is this person actually trying to prove? A claim might be factual. This policy reduced costs. It might be evaluative. This is the most effective option. Or it might call for action. Our company should allow eligible employees to work remotely 2 days per week. That last claim will be our example. Imagine a company debating whether to keep a hybrid work policy after a temporary trial. The claim is simple. The company should allow eligible employees to work remotely 2 days per week. That is the destination of the argument. But a destination is not enough. We need a reason to go there. Element 2, the grounds. The grounds are the facts, evidence, observations, or reasons offered in support of the claim. They answer the question. What do we have to go on? In our hypothetical company, the grounds might be, during a 3-month trial, the team completed the same amount of work, met every major deadline, and recorded fewer unscheduled absences. Those are the starting facts. But here is the problem. Facts do not interpret themselves. The same evidence can support different conclusions, depending on the assumption connecting it to the claim. That brings us to the most important part of the model. Element 3, the warrant. The warrant is the principle, rule, value, or assumption that explains why the grounds support the claim. It answers the question, why does this evidence justify that conclusion? In our example, the warrant might be, when a workplace policy maintains performance while improving employee reliability, the company has a good reason to keep it. Now the logic becomes visible. Grounds. The hybrid trial maintained output and reduced absences. Warrant. Policies that maintain performance and improve reliability are worth keeping. Claim. The company should continue hybrid work for eligible employees. The warrant is the bridge. And it is often the part no one says out loud. People state the evidence, they announce the conclusion, and they leave the connecting assumption hidden. That is where weak arguments often survive. Remember the employee who sent fewer emails? Grounds. They sent fewer emails. Claim. They are less productive. Warrant. Sending more emails means producing more valuable work. Once the warrant is stated clearly, you can finally evaluate it. Is email volume actually a good measure of productivity? Maybe not. The evidence could be accurate. While the argument is still weak, wrong warrant, wrong bridge, weak conclusion. Element 4, backing. Backing supports the warrant itself. It answers the question, why should we trust the principle connecting the grounds to the claim? In the hybrid work example, the company might provide backing by showing that it already evaluates workplace policies according to performance, attendance, and employee retention. It might also point to previous internal decisions, expert guidance, or broader research showing why those standards are reasonable. The grounds support the claim. The backing supports the warrant. That distinction matters. Grounds tell us what happened in this particular case. Backing tells us why the general rule being used is credible. Without backing, a warrant may sound reasonable, but collapse the moment someone challenges it. Element 5, the qualifier. The qualifier tells us how strongly the claim should be stated. It answers the question, how certain are we? Real-world arguments are rarely absolute. The evidence may support probably, not definitely. It may support in most cases and try, not always. So instead of claiming every employee should work remotely 2 days per week, a more responsible version might be eligible employees should generally be allowed to work remotely 2 days per week. Words like generally worried, probably, usually, likely, and in most cases do not automatically make an argument weaker. They can make it more accurate. A strong argument does not pretend to know more than the evidence allows. It matches the force of the claim to the strength of the support. Element 6, the rebuttal. The rebuttal identifies the exception, conditions, or circumstances that could limit the claim. It answers the question. When might this argument not apply? In our example, eligible employees should generally be allowed to work remotely 2 days per week, unless their roles require on-site equipment, continuous in-person coverage, or specific periods of face-to-face collaboration. That does not destroy the argument. It defines its boundaries, and this is where the Toulmin meaning of rebuttal is often misunderstood. A rebuttal is not simply someone shouting the opposite conclusion. It identifies the conditions under which the warrant may fail, or the claim may need to be revised. Weak arguments hide their exceptions. Strong arguments account for them, because an argument that survives only when every complication is ignored is not a strong argument. Now let's put the entire model together. Claim: eligible employees should generally be allowed to work remotely 2 days per week. Grounds: during the trial, performance remained stable. Deadlines were met, and unscheduled absences decreased. Warrant: a policy that preserves performance while improving reliability is worth continuing. Backing: the company already uses performance, attendance, and retention to evaluate workplace policies. Those standards are also supported by its previous experience and relevant research. Qualifier: generally for eligible employees. Rebuttal: unless the work requires consistent on-site presence, special equipment, or particular periods of in-person collaboration. That is a complete Toulmin argument. Not because it is automatically correct. The framework does not tell you which conclusion to accept. It tells you where to examine the reasoning. Maybe the grounds are inaccurate. Maybe the warrant is controversial. Maybe the backing comes from a weak source. Maybe the qualifier is too confident. Maybe the rebuttal ignores an important exception. The model turns one large argument into 6 smaller questions. What is the claim? What grounds support it? What warrant connects the grounds to the claim? What backing supports that warrant? How qualified should the conclusion be? And what rebuttals or exceptions limit it? Here is the warning. Most arguments are attacked at the wrong level. People repeat opposing claims. without examining the evidence. They fight over evidence. Without noticing that they are using different warrants, they demand absolute certainty when the claim was only presented as probable, or they find one exception, and act as if the entire argument has been destroyed. The Toulmin model slows that process down. It shows you exactly where the disagreement lives. Two people may agree on the facts, but disagree about the warrant. They may agree on the warrant, but disagree about whether the evidence is strong enough. They may accept the general claim, but disagree about the exceptions. That is a much more useful conversation than simply saying, "I disagree." Imagine two people debating whether college is worth the cost. They may agree that graduates earn more money on average, but one person may use the warrant. If an investment increases your average lifetime income, it is financially worthwhile. The other person may reject that warrant. They may argue that average earnings do not account for individual debt. Differences between degree programs, the time spent outside the workforce, or the possibility of reaching the same career through another path. The disagreement is not necessarily about the evidence. It may be about what that evidence is allowed to prove. Or consider an advertisement that says, "Thousands of customers have purchased this product, so it must be effective." The grounds are the number of purchases. The claim is that the product works, but the warrant is, popular products are effective products. Once you state that warrant, the weakness becomes easier to see. Popularity may show awareness, strong marketing, low pricing, or social influence. It does not automatically prove effectiveness. The Toulmin model helps you find that missing bridge. And once you find it, you can test it. Is the warrant reasonable? Does it apply in this situation? Does it need backing? Are there important exceptions? Is the conclusion stronger than the evidence allows? These questions make the model useful beyond academic writing. You can use it when reading a news article, listening to a political speech, reviewing a workplace proposal, watching an advertisement, or trying to understand why an argument online feels convincing, even when something about it seems wrong. Now flip the perspective. If you are building an argument, do not stop after finding evidence. Ask whether that evidence actually connects to your conclusion. State the warrant, support it, qualify the claim honestly. Acknowledge the conditions under which it might fail. Weak arguments make the biggest claim possible. Hide the assumption. Ignore exceptions. And hope the evidence sounds impressive enough. Strong arguments do something different. They make the reasoning visible. They show their bridge. They explain why it can hold weight, and they tell you where its limits are. That is the real power of the Toulmin model. It is not just a formula for academic essays. It is a diagnostic tool for everyday persuasion, workplace proposals, news commentary, advertisements, policy debates, social media arguments, conversations with friends. Everywhere, someone moves from "here is what I know" to "here is what you should believe." There is a warrant connecting the two. The question is whether that warrant deserves your trust. And once you start looking for warrants, you begin noticing how often people rely on them without admitting it. A politician cites one economic statistic and assumes that statistic proves the entire policy is working. A company points to increased website traffic and assumes more traffic means the marketing campaign succeeded. A parent sees a lower test score and assumes the student did not work hard enough. A social media post receives thousands of likes, and people assume the information must be credible. In each case, the grounds may be real, but the conclusion depends on a warrant. Economic improvement must be measured by that statistic. Traffic must be the correct measure of campaign success. Effort must be the primary cause of the test score. Popularity must indicate credibility. The warrant is where the argument becomes vulnerable, and it is also where the most meaningful discussion can begin. Instead of asking only, "Is this evidence true?" ask, What does this evidence actually prove? Instead of asking only, do I agree with the conclusion? Ask, what assumption connects the evidence to it? Instead of rejecting an entire argument because you found one exception, ask whether the claim was properly qualified. And instead of pretending your own argument has no weaknesses, identify the limits before someone else does. Claim, grounds, warrant, backing, qualifier, rebuttal. 6 elements, 1 argument, and a way to see the hidden reasoning underneath it. The claim tells you where the argument wants to go. The grounds tell you where it begins. The warrant builds the bridge between them. The backing helps support that bridge. The qualifier tells you how much weight it can carry, and the rebuttal shows you where it may not reach. Once you see the bridge, you can finally decide whether the argument actually crosses it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.